Hi there, everyone. Allison Skalberg here. We are happy to be here with you tonight with ADDA, Attention Deficit Disorder Association, the Southern region. It has been around since 1987. This is Pam Esser's baby, which we're all proud to be a part of it. ADDA has organizations all across the state of Texas, and we are actually in Fort Bend County. And our group typically serves parents. Parents attend our group who have kids with ADHD and other comorbid conditions. And each month we meet the last Tuesday of every month. We typically do not meet during the summer or right around Christmas, at times like that. But we have a special guest speaker every month, and the topics change every single month. And tonight, we are happy to be back with Dr. Lindsay Asawa, and she is going to be talking to us about parenting tips and as it relates to anxiety. So this is a new topic for us tonight. We're happy to be chatting with Lindsay about this. We invite everyone to put their questions in the chat box. We're going to take the questions throughout. I'll pop in and ask questions throughout the presentation. If you're planning your evening, we will be done by 7:30. This is going to run just under an hour. And we are in webinar mode tonight. So that means that we can't see you or hear you, but we do know you're out there, and we're happy that you joined us tonight. This presentation is being recorded. Everybody that has signed up for this is going to get a copy of the slides, so you don't have to write every single thing down. And you're also going to get a link to the recording. In addition to the slides and the link to the recording, you're also going to get an invitation for the Neuroscience for the Neurodiverse convention on Saturday, April 20th, 2024. It runs from 9 a.m. to 12:15, and it is at the Monarch School. The cost for this is $45. We're going to have an attachment in your email that kind of basically explains all of this. For any of our professionals that are on here that might need CEs, this is eligible for 3 CE credits. So Pam wanted to make sure that we mention this to everyone, so you'll get a link to that as well. So having said that, I'm going to turn everything over to Lindsay. Lindsay, it's always a pleasure to have you back with us, and we're excited to hear what you have to say.
Thank you, Allison. Okay, so I am Lindsay Asawa. I'm a licensed psychologist, licensed child psychologist, and I have a practice in Missouri City called Missouri City Family Counseling. I have information about that on this screen. So feel free after tonight to reach out to me if you have questions. I have my email and our clinic phone number and website on there. At our clinic, so I am our testing coordinator. I do lots of testing for kids, for adults. So I've worked with kids for years with anxiety at lots of different levels of severity, from very mild anxiety to some more severe anxiety disorders. And so we're going to talk a little bit about anxiety in kids tonight. But we do also work a lot with children with ADHD, as well as adults with ADHD. We do testing for ADHD. And so that's how I've been very involved in this organization. And I want to mention that this topic of anxiety and parenting tips for anxious kids. So that we could go into a lot of detail today about why anxiety happens, what the biology is behind it. And that could be a whole presentation on its own. And so I'm going to kind of skip over that part for today and talk more about kind of what to do about it, because I wanted that to be the focus, some tips so that you guys can take with you and be practicing and using at home. So to start with, I did want to just say a little bit about anxiety and what it looks like, because sometimes we don't necessarily recognize it for what it is. It can look so different. These are some of the many faces of anxiety. And I'm focusing on kids today, but a lot of what I'm going to say in this presentation is going to apply to adults with anxiety as well. But for kids, we do see a lot of just anger and irritability and kind of explosiveness. And sometimes what might be underlying that is high anxiety. But we may not see that on the surface. And so we may not know that that's what's going on. We also, of course, can see the opposite, kids that are very quiet and sullen, even to the point of kids who are not speaking at all, which we have a diagnosis called selective mutism, kids who will talk at home and they won't talk to anyone else in public. And that's a form of anxiety as well. And that's caused by anxiety. We see lots of just fidgeting and nail biting, but of course, with our kids with ADHD, we also see fidgeting and nail biting sometimes. So one thing we have to do when we evaluate is we have to try to tease out, is there some anxiety going on there? Or is this just a fidgety behavior that might be part of an ADHD diagnosis? Or is it both? And so oftentimes there's some overlap with the fidgeting. We have lots of kids with difficulty sleeping, either falling asleep or staying asleep, waking throughout the night, having trouble sleeping in their own bedroom due to nighttime fears. Lots of school refusal, to the point that we've worked with a lot of clients, kids who are just not able to get to school, and parents have had to pull them out and try other options, homeschool or smaller private schools. But school refusal can be a pretty big issue for kids with more severe anxiety, and it can develop into that if we don't nip it in the bud early on. Of course, crying episodes, and that's one that, we may look at kids who cry often and think that there's maybe some depression going on there, or maybe they're just very sensitive, overly emotional kids. But again, that can sometimes be a sign of anxiety in kids. Clinginess, of course, which can also relate to another diagnosis of separation anxiety disorder in kids who are pretty severely clingy and really have a hard time separating from parents. Avoidance is huge, and we'll talk about avoidance, but avoidance of anything that causes anxiety for them. That's another thing that we see. Perfectionism. So a lot of our kids with high anxiety tend to be perfectionists. They want things to be a certain way, and they get very upset if things are not that way, and they may try again and again. They may repeat behaviors in order to get it right. Our kids that we work with who are GT, gifted and talented identified kids, also tend to have some of that perfectionism, but there can be some anxiety going along with that. Lots of rigidness and inflexibility that comes with anxiety. And again, that can be something that can be misdiagnosed. That's also something we see with autism spectrum. That's something we can see with ADHD, but sometimes it's stemming from anxiety, or, an underlying anxiety disorder. And that's where that rigidness is coming from. Kids with anxiety can be very hypervigilant, very on edge. So they can be, just kind of up here all the time and ready to explode or ready to be startled by any little thing. So they're kids that can be very jumpy, kids that will snap very easily. And then we see some appetite issues. We see bedwetting, we see nightmares. So these are just things that we're looking for, and some things that anxiety can look like when we're trying to determine if that's what's going on. And that's something as parents that you guys can kind of keep an eye on and watch for. And then these are some of the physical symptoms. And the reason I wanted to mention this is because when we're working with kids always have more trouble expressing their emotions through words. And so we usually see it more through behaviors like the ones I just mentioned, and through some physical symptoms. And these physical symptoms can be psychological in nature. So they can be what we call somatic or psychosomatic symptoms. But as parents, we may look at these symptoms and we may just think they are what they are, that my child just has a stomach ache. But there might be more to it than that. Kids that are having frequent stomach aches and nausea, especially if it follows a pattern, maybe it's happening often at school, then of course that can be related to anxiety. We also, this list here goes for kids and adults. So racing heart, headaches, sweating, some trembliness or shakiness, shortness of breath, chest pain. They'll talk about feeling really hot all of a sudden, and then some soreness. And the reason for the muscle pain and the soreness can be tension, tense muscles that are happening often and leading to that soreness. And then the dizziness and lightheadedness can kind of go along with some of the shortness of breath and the racing heart. So these are all some physical symptoms that are pretty common in kids with anxiety, but as a whole, these can also be things that we see with more severe anxiety, like panic attacks, and kids, of course, experience panic attacks just like adults. But in kids, it may look a little bit different. They may just fall on the floor crying. And we may not understand that they actually are experiencing some of these physical symptoms. And it might be hard for them to communicate that to us unless we're asking them specifically to describe it. They have a hard time with that. When we work with kids in therapy, they have a really hard time describing how anxiety feels inside their body. And that's something we really work with them on, because if they can be aware of that, then they can start to notice when they're feeling anxious. But we'll get to that a little bit more in a minute. So these are
we
my
had a
list.
quick question.
Oh, yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Can I ask that? So a person said, how do you work with children who may show an increase in anxiety from stimulants? My son has ADHD, anxiety, and autism, and anxiety can be paralyzing.
Yes, it can. Okay, so the question, I missed part of the question at the beginning.
How do you work with children who may show an increase in anxiety, possibly stemming from stimulants, is basically what the question is.
Okay, stemming from stimulus, okay. So a lot of kids do tend to, their brains are wired in a way that they are more sensitive to sensory stimuli. So, and that might be what this parent is referring to, but and that could be, noises, light, people, just any kind of chaos around you, and that sensory stimuli that we're taking in can be very overwhelming for some kids because their brains are wired to be more hyper aware of that stimuli. And kids with ADHD do have that tendency, as well as kids on the autism spectrum are oftentimes very sensitive to sensory stimuli. And that does contribute to anxiety, very much so. And so that's something that I'll get to some ideas of what you can do about that. I think one thing that's important about that is awareness, being able to identify that and understand that there might be some sensory input that's contributing to anxiety in that moment. And as a parent, what we can do is observe and watch for patterns and kind of try to take note of that. And we can then use those observations to try to set them up for success and try to give them the tools that they need so that they can get that level of stimulation back down. Because that does tend to keep them, I talked about in that other screen that hyper arousal, or kids that are just very on edge, and sensory stimuli can do that to them. That can keep them very on edge so that they are kind of ready to overreact or ready to snap or ready to explode or have a meltdown. And so we need to get that overall level of stimulation down for them. And some of the ideas that I'll talk about today will address that. So I'll get to that part.
I just have one more question in the chat box. They say that their child has autism and typically bites fingernails, picks things, picks everything, feels pain off the wall and things like that. And, they try to redirect. And basically, they're looking for some tips on other redirections. It's been a struggle, and they've not had the success that they had hoped for. So if you could provide any at-home recommendations for better direction to help with this.
Yes, absolutely. That I will be talking about that as well. Those are great questions. And I'm glad that you guys are asking those questions, because that's exactly what I'll try to address. I don't have all the answers, but I do have some ideas, and I'm sure many of you had tried some of the ideas we'll talk about, but hopefully there will be some that you haven't tried that maybe you can take away from this. So this screen is really kind of my overall plan. So these are, if I had to think of 8 things to tell you as parents from the years that I've worked with kids with anxiety, these are my 8 things. I think number 1, and some of these I'm going to go into more detail about, but number 1, setting a good example as a parent. And what I mean by that is being being aware of your own anxiety. So, as parents of anxious kids, oftentimes we become anxious ourselves, or maybe we were anxious and we've kind of passed some of that on to our kids. And so we need to be aware of our own anxiety. We need to work on our own anxiety, on managing it, whether that means reaching out for help and working with a therapist yourself as a parent, or using some of these techniques that we'll talk about today for yourself so that you can manage your own anxiety. And I really think it's very powerful when parents model some of these coping strategies for their kids. As parents, when we do it and we do it right in front of them, that can be one of the most powerful learning experiences for them. If I'm feeling anxious and I tell my kids, okay, guys, I just need to take a few deep breaths because my heart's racing. I'm feeling a little anxious right now. Give me just a minute. I need to take some deep breaths. That's really good for them to see. So that's a huge one, is setting a good example. Number two is a lot of parents of anxious kids tend to kind of modify their expectations for those kids because they know that they're anxious and we want to protect them. Our instinct is to protect them, so we don't want to push our anxious kids as much, and we want to kind of we have that tendency to want to rescue them a little bit more. So we may not require the same things of them that we require of our other kids that are maybe less anxious. And I would encourage you to not change those expectations. Keep the same expectations, keep your standards at the same level for all of your kids, even your anxious kids, but you may just need to go about it a different way with your anxious kiddos because they may need a little bit more support and more help, but they need to have the same expectations, the same goals. You need to have the same goals for them that you have for your other kids. We don't want to send the message to them that they're not capable, because they're very capable. And that's actually a good message to be sending for anxious kids. So number three is, again, we try to rescue them, and it's really hard as parents to see them experiencing the anxiety that they're going through. And I know this, I have 3 kids and I have one who's very anxious. So I know this very well. It's hard to watch that as a parent. And what I've learned as a psychologist is that they have to feel that anxiety. We have to allow them to feel it, because feelings, emotions are like a tunnel. You can't get around it. You have to go through it. That's the only way. They have to go through the anxiety and experience it to get to the other side. And we'll talk a little bit about why that is. Number 4 is the coping skills. So as parents, we can be teaching and practicing some of those coping skills at home, starting at a young age. We can do it daily. We can just make it part of our daily lives. And that is a huge way of teaching our kids how to manage their anxiety so that it doesn't take over their life. Number 5 is helping them face their fears. And I'm going to talk more about this one. This is something that we work on in therapy as well, because again, they have to feel that anxiety in order to get through it. So they may have to face some of those fears that they're trying to avoid. Number 6, and this goes with number 5, is we do want to help them face their fears, but we want to do it in, I always say, a firm but gentle way, and what I mean by that is I want you to stand firm on what you expect them to do. They need to come with you to the birthday party. They need to come with you to go say hi to somebody if they're feeling shy. So we are firm about that, but we can do it in a gentle way. We don't have to be harsh and we don't have to be mean about it. We can say, come on, I know you can do it. I'm going to be right here with you. Just stay here with me and let's do it together. So we can be nice about it, but it doesn't mean we're going to back down and we're going to let them off the hook. So that's that firm but gentle approach that's really, really important when you're parenting an anxious kid. And then number 7 is also a big one for me, which is praising those little tiny small successes, because it's sometimes as parents, we're kind of waiting for the big ones. And so we may not point it out. We may not say anything until we see something big, but they actually need us to point out those small things, every little tiny baby step that they take. If it's noticed and if that's celebrated, then they will do it again and again and again, because they like that positive attention. And so I've actually found that that's one of the best ways to get progress in the clients we work with. Is if we just find those tiny successes and we make a big deal out of it, then the next time they come in, they've had 5 more of those tiny successes and then 10 more. And so that's how we grow and make progress. And then the last one, of course, is I'm going to give you guys lots of strategies today, but you can always reach out for help. That's why I'm here also representing the mental health field. That's what we do every day. We are trained to do this and to help parents work with kids who are anxious. And so if you're having trouble coping with your own anxiety, or you're having trouble putting some of these strategies into place in your household, then there's therapists that can help with that and can support you with that process. Okay, so more information.
Are you going to go into the coping skills? Someone asked
Yes.
about the coping skills. It's probably in your slides.
And that's a good transition, because that's what we're going to do now. Yep. So we're going to talk about some of these coping skills. And these are some of the ones we use a lot in our individual therapy sessions. We also do group therapy, and we use some of these same techniques with groups of kids. But these are just some really standard, tried and true coping strategies that really do work if we practice them with our kids and we model it for them and we show them that we're doing it as well. So these are some relaxation techniques. I'll talk about some other ideas as well, but these are 3 big ones. So belly breathing is one that we always teach and use in therapy. And we call it belly breathing because we want them to kind of focus on that idea of that their belly should be going in and out, because they're filling their lungs with air as they breathe in. We also want them to turn their attention to their breathing. And that's an important part. I just taught this past week in a group to a group of boys. And one of the boys said, "Why do I need to do this? I breathe every day." We breathe all day, every day. Why would I need to focus on my breathing? And so, but the idea behind it is when we turn our attention to our breathing, we actually start to be more aware of our body. We take our attention away from whatever it is that's causing us anxiety and stress. And we can actually slow down our breathing, because we know that when we're anxious, our sympathetic nervous system kicks in, which means our brain thinks that there's a threat. So our heart starts beating faster, our breathing speeds up. We might feel a little bit nauseous. All these things start happening to our body, and our brain is mistaken. There's not a threat, but we think there is. So we have to actually kind of turn that switch off, and we have to tell our brain everything's okay. There's no reason to panic. And one way we can do that is by doing the opposite of what's happening to our body. So if our breath is speeding up, we can slow it back down. And that sends a message to our brain that everything's fine. And now our opposite system, our parasympathetic system, will kick in, which slows everything back down again. So we're trying to turn that switch on and turn the other switch off. So what we do with kids is we teach them this belly breathing technique, and we have lots of ways of teaching it. And some of your kids may have learned this from school or from other places, and you'll hear lots of names for it. So there's many options, but I put a few options here, and I'll tell you what these are. So balloon breaths is we tell kids to imagine that when they breathe in, that there's a balloon in their belly, and they're expanding the balloon with the air that they're breathing in. And then when they blow back out, then the balloon is shrinking. So we're kind of using that balloon analogy. Star breathing is we either use an actual picture of a star on a piece of paper, or I also just teach it using my hand with our 5 fingers. And what we teach them is to start here with your other hand and trace as you're breathing. And so you breathe in and you hold it, and then you breathe out as you go down. And then you breathe in, hold it, and you breathe out as you go down. So it just gives them some structure, something visual, and it helps them to practice it in a way that's easy and it makes sense to them. And that forces them to take 5 good deep breaths. So it's a good strategy for them. For little ones, I use this analogy of blowing bubbles. So we actually will practice blowing real bubbles. We'll get some bubbles from the store. We'll blow bubbles, and we'll talk about how if we blow really fast, then the bubble pops. But if we blow really, really slow, then you start to see the bubble. And so that's how we teach them to blow out really slow. We teach them take a deep breath in and then blow out really, really slow, just like you're blowing bubbles. And then we use that from then on with little ones to remind them to take deep breaths. We say, blow your bubbles. And it's kind of a fun way to teach them. Rainbow breathing it incorporates some muscle stretches, which is nice. So it's the idea of reaching your arms out, and then you breathe in as your arms go up. So the rainbow is going in, and then breathe out as your arms go down, and you're making a rainbow with your arms. Buddy breathing is also, a lot of kids enjoy that because we have them pick a stuffed animal, and it's their buddy, and they lay down on the floor on their back, and they put the stuffed animal on their belly, and then they practice breathing in and out and watching the stuffed animal go up and down on their belly, kind of like he's going for a ride on their belly. And again, it just teaches them to focus on their breathing and focus on their belly going in and up and down. And these are ways to cause that parasympathetic nervous system to kick in to relax their body. Progressive muscle relaxation it takes it a step further. So aside from focusing just on the breathing, we also want kids to notice when their muscles are starting to tense up, which is a common physical reaction to anxiety. So we want them to notice that's happening. And sometimes we don't notice. It's hard to be aware of that. And so progressive muscle relaxation is when we start at the feet and we have them tense and then release. And then we move up the body and we'll do their legs, and we have them tense their legs and then release. And we do it several times. So we have them tense and hold it for like 15 to 20 seconds, 10 seconds. And then we release and hold it and relax for 15 to 20 seconds. And then we tense again a second time, and then we relax. And we do that moving all the way up the body and tensing and releasing each muscle group. And by the time they finish that process, they are so relaxed. And we actually use this strategy also for helping with sleep at night. It's a great thing to do right before you go to sleep for kids who are struggling to wind down, which our kids with ADHD really struggle with this. It's hard to wind their brain down or shut their brain off and wind their body down. So this is a good way to do that because it gives them something to focus on. And it's a step-by-step process. But by the time they get to the end of it, they really are, their body's very relaxed and they really are feeling kind of sleepy. Visualization is another fun one that the kids really enjoy. And it actually, there's been research showing that this does have a true physical effect on your body. It does relax your body. It slows your breathing. It reduces your blood pressure. It has a true physical effect. So visualization is coming up with a scene that you want to visualize. And with kids, what we do often is we'll have them draw it first. We'll say, think of a place where you would feel very, very relaxed, a place that makes you happy, a place that it's kind of their happy place. And it could be a beach, it could be their bedroom, it could be Disney World. I mean, I've had kids come up with lots of different ideas, and we have them draw a picture of it. And then we go through their 5 senses because we want to make this as realistic as possible. So we have them think about, if you were there right now, tell me all the things you would see, and tell me all the noises you would hear, and all of the sensations, the physical sensations. Like, would you feel the sun on your skin? Would you feel the wind blowing in your hair? And then would you be eating something? What would that taste like? What would you smell? So we want to make it very, very realistic. And then what we do is have them practice that, close their eyes and visualize that, and go through all those 5 senses so they can make it as realistic as possible. And it truly has a relaxing effect on the body. We've done this strategy with adults as well, and it's really, really powerful. There's lots of recorded versions of this, audio versions of this is also kind of known as guided imagery. And you can find audio versions where they'll go through all kinds of detailed scenes in very soothing voices. And you can find these for kids and for adults. But it's another great relaxation technique, and another one that's helpful at night, at bedtime. So these are some other ideas for mindfulness is something that we're finding in the field of psychology. We're kind of finding that mindfulness is an incredibly powerful technique, and we're learning that it's useful for many diagnoses. It's something that we're now using with all of our kids with ADHD, and we are using it across the board with anxiety. It absolutely is effective with anxiety. There's lots of research studies that have looked at this. There's lots of books on mindfulness. So if it's something that you've never heard of, please look into it. It's a really helpful strategy for managing anxiety. I put some things here, just a few ideas. There's lots of other ideas out there, but I chose a few to talk about. I mentioned at the top the word grounding. So that refers to, with anxiety, we get carried away. Our body thinks that there's a threat. So, all these physical symptoms are happening. Our mind is being carried away because we're worried either about the past or about the future. And so everything's getting carried away. And so what we have to do is we have to bring ourselves back. We have to ground ourselves in the present moment, and ground ourselves back inside of our body, because it's almost like we're kind of leaving our body. We're losing control in some ways. So grounding is a really useful thing, and we can use mindfulness to do that. Mindfulness is that idea of being mindful of the present moment. So this list right here, the mindful moment, what that is, I call it mindful moment. There's other people use other terms for it. I've seen people refer to it for kids as using your spidey senses, which I think is cute. But a mindful moment is this picture on the right. It's taking a moment and using all your 5 senses and just being mindful of what's happening around you. So name 5 things you can see, 4 things you can feel, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. We do this all the time in therapy sessions, and schools are using this now to kind of get kids, when things are getting a little out of control in the classroom. It's a way to get everybody to all of a sudden stop and be mindful and be aware and be present. It's just a really quick little activity. You can do it in the car. You can do it at the dinner table. You can do it when your kids are getting overly active or overstimulated. So that's a great one to practice. A body scan is stopping and scanning your body mentally to look for areas of tension. And like I said earlier, even to tense and release those muscles, to let out that tension. So you can do a body scan when you're laying down and close your eyes and really focus to scan your body for any of those areas, or you can do it standing up, sitting down, anywhere. 1 minute of silence is just what it says, stopping and taking a minute of silence, again, to just notice. All you're doing is noticing. You're noticing what's happening inside you. You're noticing what's happening outside of you. It's sometimes that moment can be really powerful, because it can help us to stop before we overreact, or before we explode, or before we make a bad decision. So that can be another good one to practice. A mindful walk outside. Being outdoors is an incredible place to practice mindfulness, because it's very easy to go through this list of things you can see, feel, hear, smell. There's things all around us outside that we can notice, and it's very soothing and relaxing. Squeezes and hugs. So the reason that that's a mindfulness technique is when we get a hug from someone else, or when we squeeze our own body, wrap our arms around us and squeeze, then it gives us a physical sensation that we can notice, right? We can pay attention to that feeling of squeezing and tightening. And sometimes that also, for a lot of kids, that pressure can be a very soothing thing, because they're getting so much sensory input and it's overwhelming to their brain, and the pressure actually can give them, can help to ground them again in their body. A mindful jar or a glitter jar, these are things we also make with kids, and it's a fun activity, but it's something you can then use to practice mindfulness. And it's just, I'm sure you all have seen them. They're just the jars of water. They usually have like liquid soap, or I think corn syrup. There's different ways to make it, but you add some glitter to the jar. You can add different, sometimes little beads and other things. And then when you shake that jar, then all of it goes everywhere, right? And so what we teach kids is that that's similar to our brain. When we're feeling overwhelmed, our thoughts and our feelings get all mixed up in our brain, and it's hard to think clearly. It's hard to make good decisions. It's hard to calm down. And so we show them that when you stop and hold that jar still and you wait and you take a few moments, then everything starts to settle and everything starts to calm down at the bottom. And so it's a really good analogy and a way for them to understand that sometimes being still and just noticing what's happening and breathing and being quiet, that sometimes that can actually help to calm their brain. It can help them to sort out the feelings and the thoughts that are happening. And it's, I think, also just a fun activity and a fun way to teach these lessons. A cold drink of water, again, it's something so simple, but it can make such a big difference when you're panicking or when you're overwhelmed with anxiety. Just going and getting a cold drink of water, because again, it's those physical sensations, the cold, the feeling of it going down your throat, the feeling of it on your lips, and teaching them to be mindful of that moment, of that cold drink, and what does it feel like? What does it taste like? We can do that also with snacks in general, just having a mindful snack. And then humming a favorite song, it gives them something to think about, it gives them something to listen to. It's a soothing sensation. That sensation, the vibration of the humming can be soothing. So these are just ways to kind of get them back inside their body, help them notice something in that moment, so they're not getting carried away with all these big feelings and big thoughts. And then just some self-soothing in general. And this, again, it's using those 5 senses. But this is also for those kids that do tend to get overwhelmed by their senses. So we can pay attention to what they are looking for, what they're seeking out, and to what they're trying to get away from. Some kids seek out noise. Some kids try to get away from noise when they're feeling overwhelmed. So we need to pay attention to what they are needing in that moment, but we can come up with some tools and we can create a space for them to use those tools when they need them. So a lot of our kids that we work with, we talk about creating a calm down corner somewhere in the house or in their bedroom, or a calm down spot. We can also we've done calm down kits or bags or boxes where we put a lot of these tools, and it can go with you. You can bring it in the car, you can bring it on trips. And that's something that then you can teach them when to use it, when they are working on that self-awareness of, oh, my muscles are feeling tense, my face is feeling hot, my stomach's feeling nauseous, I think I'm getting a little bit anxious. I'm going to grab my calm down bag, and we teach them to do that. This is something that they're not going to instinctively always do, but it's something we can practice, and we can role play with them, and we can do it over and over and over and give them reminders. And then it will become habit. It will become something they just go to when they need it, and they use those tools when they need them. And these are just examples in each of those 5 categories of some great ideas. There's so many more, and there's lots of good lists of these tools. There's different websites that you can find, but I wanted to put some here. So for C, for example, you can include that glitter jar in the calm down corner. You can put some kids. I had a client who was very soothed by doing puzzles, and she was a very anxious child, but she would go down to her basement and she would just start working on a puzzle, and it was very soothing. It was something to look at. It was something to touch. She would do it with quiet all around her, and it helped calm her right down. Coloring, we use those coloring books. Even the adult coloring books, I think, can be really, really helpful for doing something soothing that you can look at and you can touch. There's others there. Let's see, for touch, brushing. So a lot of kids are soothed by that brushing sensation on their skin or on their hair. And so keeping a brush there might be helpful. Both warm and cold temperatures can be soothing for kids depending on what they are drawn to. We have some kids that, they want like a warm a warm wrap or a warm rag that they can use. Some kids gravitate towards cold and frozen things that we keep in the freezer. Weighted blankets, we keep them at my office. My kids have weighted blankets. I'm sure many of you have tried it, but again, it's that pressure on your skin that can be really helpful for kids who are feeling overstimulated or feeling anxious. And fidget toys we use also just for our kids with ADHD, our fidgety kids, but they can be really soothing for kids with anxiety as well. Let's see, I won't go through all of these. You guys can look through them, but a couple others I'll just mention for hearing. Like I said, some kids are drawn to noise and some kids need to turn off the noise. So you may need to consider some noise canceling headphones or just some soft music that they can listen to. Audiobooks, a lot of the kids I work with really do well with audiobooks when they're feeling overwhelmed or anxious, because it is kind of a distraction as well as something soothing to listen to. For smells, you wouldn't even think of some of these things, but they can be really helpful. Things like scented stickers or lotions or chapsticks. Some families make some smell like scent jars where they fill them with different kinds of things, herbs and spices and different types of scents and essential oils. And they can keep those little scent jars and they can go through and smell them. And it's soothing to their sense of smell. And then taste, let me see, I'm covering it up here. So taste is a hard one. We don't want them to gravitate towards food as something that's soothing them when they're anxious, but there's lots of other options. Chewing gum. Some kids, again, like to have kind of those frozen, chewy fidgets that you can put in the freezer, but that they can just chew on when they need to. That cold drink of water, like I said, very powerful. If you do snacks, it's helpful to try some different healthy snacks, of course, but different textures, maybe some soft, some gummy things, some crunchy things, because it's those different textures that can also be very soothing to them. So aside from trying to calm and soothe our body, and which also soothes our brain, the other thing that we need to address with anxious kids is their thoughts. And I'm sure many of you have noticed this, that they tend to have lots of negative thoughts, and those thoughts are usually focused on either the past or the future, not necessarily the present. And that's what's constantly taking them away from the present moment, which is why that mindfulness is so important. But when they're having these negative thoughts, we hear lots of what if thoughts from anxious kids. What if this happens? What if that happens? And that's something that you can actually talk to them about and start pointing out. You can start saying, that's a what if thought. I just heard a what if thought, because they can start to recognize when they're doing it. And we want to teach them that these negative thoughts are not all accurate. They're not all true. So they can start to evaluate how true is this thought? And also maybe, is this a helpful thought or is this an unhelpful thought? And start kind of categorizing those thoughts. You can do it on paper in a journal, but you could also do it through discussions with them. And that cognitive triangle on the right, so that's kind of the basis of a lot of the therapy that we do with anxious kids. And this cognitive triangle is used all over the place. You'll see it, for many different diagnoses, many different psychological disorders, but it kind of applies to everything, because we do know that our thoughts impact our feelings impact our behaviors, and our behaviors impact our thoughts. So it's this cycle that we get caught in. And if we can change any one of those three things, it will change the others. It's a guarantee. And so what we work on with kids is trying to do some of the mindfulness and some of those self-soothing activities and relaxation activities, which will help with those feelings, those big feelings. But then we also, and it's a behavior. It's giving them a different behavior to do, which is then going to also change those feelings and those thoughts that they're having. And then we also want to work on the thoughts. So we want to teach them to talk back to those thoughts, those negative thoughts that they're having. They don't have to just accept them for what they are. They can talk back. They can say, no, I'm not dumb. I'm a smart kid. I know I am. I work hard. And some of this I like to use with kids I like to come up with some positive affirmations based on some of those discussions that we have. You know, if I know that they're having one specific negative thought that keeps coming up over and over, well, we figure out how can you talk back to that thought, and then we come up with a good positive affirmation that they can just say to themselves repeatedly. They can put it on a sign on the wall in their bedroom. They can repeat it every day. And those positive affirmations, again, there's actually research showing how powerful those can be. It's kind of, I mean, I kind of joke with kids that it's like we're brainwashing ourselves. We're convincing our brain of something that we didn't believe. And that they will say that. A lot of kids will say that to us, but I'm not going to use that thought because I don't believe it. So we just kind of explain to them that the more you say these things to yourself, the more you will start to believe it. The more you hear something, the more you start to believe it, right? So what we say to ourselves matters. So we have to teach these positive affirmations and statements that they can say. And then the worry time at the bottom, the idea of worry time is set aside the worries for later. So schedule some worry time, and it's a limited amount of time, and spend that time talking about what did they worry about today. Use these strategies up here, you know, evaluate how accurate those thoughts are, talk back to those thoughts, come up with some positive affirmations, and then worry time is over. And then say, okay, let's go do something else now. Because one thing we tend to do is we get stuck in that pattern of dwelling on the worries too much. And it can just be this vicious cycle where what we don't realize and what kids don't realize is that when we're giving lots of attention to those worries, they actually grow. They don't go away. And so we have to really kind of limit that time and not spend too much time dwelling on it. Don't get caught up in that. It's easy to do that as a parent. Let's see. So this is another important thing. I mentioned avoidance earlier. This cycle is really important to know, because when we feel anxious, our tendency is, or our instinct is, to avoid whatever is making us anxious. And we think that works because we get some brief relief, right? We feel better because we avoided it. But what we don't recognize is the long-term consequences of that, which is that our anxiety will actually grow over time if we continuously keep avoiding. And so I mentioned earlier that we have to, the only way to get past anxiety is to go through it. And this is why. If we keep avoiding, we will keep adding and growing that anxiety. So we have to stop avoiding. So that's something we need to work with our kids on as parents. And we do that by teaching them to face their fears. And this is easier said than done. I know it is hard to do, but the first thing we need to do is figure out what are they avoiding. And it may not be all that obvious. Like, let's say they go to birthday parties. They have no problem going to birthday parties, but maybe they stay near you at the birthday party. They don't like to go sit with the other kids to have cake. So they're not avoiding birthday parties, sure, but they are avoiding sitting next to the other kids at the table. So figure out what it is that they're avoiding, and then come up with some baby steps, because we don't want to throw them in cold turkey. You know, that is terrifying for an anxious kid, and it's probably going to backfire, and it's probably going to increase their anxiety, unfortunately. So what we need to do is set them up for success and just take baby steps. And decide, okay, I know they can handle this, so I'm going to push them just to do this, because we do need to be pushing them, but we don't have to push too hard. We can push little by little. And when I say set them up for success, I mean also consider the whole situation. Consider, like, is there something that may help them to be successful? Will it be helpful for you to still be there with them because they're working on something that's really tough for them? So maybe having you there as support is good. So figure out how to set them up for success. I mentioned praising them earlier and celebrating those small things. Well, one way you can do that is pointing out evidence that they can do it. And the evidence is times that they already did it. So if you have any evidence you can find that, what about that time that you were scared to climb up on that slide, but you did it and you went down that really big slide all by yourself? You know, point those things out to them, find evidence and let them know, because that will start to be evidence that they file away in their brain. And the more evidence they file away, the more confident they will start to feel. Some parents will even make that visual, have a board where you can actually put up Post-it notes, or you can start writing down every time you see a little piece of evidence of success, something that they did where they were facing their fears, and they will start to see all that evidence growing. The team approach is letting them know they're not in this alone. You're there with them. You guys are going to work on this together. You're going to take these steps and you're going to work on these goals, but you'll be right there the whole time, because it makes them feel more confident. What they need to do is they need to feed off of our confidence. And one thing I see parents of anxious kids doing is that we start to feel afraid for them. And they see that, they sense that, they know that we're afraid, and that makes them feel more afraid. So even if you're inside, if you're terrified and you feel like this may go very wrong for my child and I'm really nervous, try your best as a parent to not put that fear on them. Convey confidence to them. Say, I know you can do it. This is going to be awesome. You're going to do great, because they need to hear that, and they need our confidence. They need to borrow it for a little bit. And resist that urge to rescue, which will come up, especially if things are not going well. They're facing one of those fears and it's not going great. Resist that urge, because they need to feel it. Unfortunately, they need to feel that fear and feel that anxiety. And what happens is when they get through it to the other side, they gain some confidence, because they realize, oh, I just did that. I just made it through that. And I survived. It wasn't as bad as I thought. And if we step in and we rescue, then we're not giving them that opportunity to be successful. We just took it away from them. So that's really important, to kind of let them get through it. And then some parents will go a little too extreme on the side of pushing, and when their kids are not able to do it, or when they, it doesn't go as well as it could have, those parents may be a little too hard on them. And that's not going to help in this situation. We really need to focus on the positive reinforcement. So giving them lots of praise, lots of encouragement, lots of support. And if it doesn't go as well as we were hoping, then we need to convey still that we're proud. We're proud of whatever they were able to do, and say, we'll try it again next time, but you were able to do this, and I'm really proud of that. And next time, I bet you're going to be able to do this too. It's really keeping things positive, because that's going to keep their confidence up. I don't think that we have time to go through these, but I was just listing here a few examples just of some common ones that we've worked with. Some fears that kids often have. Shyness in social situations is a really big one, which again can grow into something more severe. It can grow into social anxiety disorder, which can be crippling for some people. So it's something we need to address when we see it. Getting into a swimming pool, and sleeping in their own bedroom is another really big one. Lots of kids have fears of their bedroom. I have teens that are really scared to order food at a restaurant or make a phone call to somebody they don't know. Our perfectionist kiddos having trouble making mistakes on their work. And what happens is, like for that one, a quick example, a kid that makes a mistake and then they crumple it up and they throw it away and they get a new piece of paper. If we just let them keep doing that, it's kind of feeding that fear. And the fear is they're afraid of it not being perfect. And we have to allow them to face that fear. So what we have to do is say, okay, just do it one time, and then we're going to put it in your folder, and we're going to turn it in, and we're going to go do something else. And they will cry and they will scream and they will be upset, but they have to get through that, because they have to see that I survived. I'm okay. And my paper wasn't perfect, but that's okay. And that's the only way they can learn that, by going through it. So I have some videos and apps I wanted to mention. There's so many more out there, but these are some great ones. These three YouTube channels, Go Noodle, Fablefy, and Cosmic Kids, have some really good videos that we use all the time with kids that practice a lot of those skills I mentioned today. So some of those mindfulness skills and relaxation techniques. And those videos are a great way to do it, because it keeps the kids engaged, and they're short and they're fun. So I love using those with younger kids. Even with like older school age kids do well with those videos too. And then these apps are great for teens. They all include some of these strategies we talked about today, like kind of walking them through some relaxation and breathing techniques, giving them some peaceful and relaxing music or sounds to listen to, monitoring their mood daily, helping them challenge and talk back to those negative thoughts and those worries. So the apps will kind of walk them through it. And we know our kids are on their phones and their iPads anyway. And so having one of these useful apps could be a good idea. I wouldn't do a whole bunch, I would just choose one and kind of talk to them about it, use it with them, remind them to use it. So it becomes something that they're actually incorporating into their daily life and something useful to them. If they're in therapy, they can also, that's something that the therapist can work with as well. The therapist can remind them and use that app with them in therapy. And then there's so many good books, and I couldn't list lots of books for you guys today. So what I did was just kind of pull out one that I like for adults, for parents, one that I like for kids, and one that I like for teens. But there's lots of great ones. This Helping Your Anxious Child for parents it really walks you through a lot of the techniques I talked about, and it follows that cognitive triangle that I mentioned with the thoughts and the feelings and the behaviors. And it kind of helps you as a parent figure out how to apply this to your life with your child. And then I love this what to do when you worry too much. They use this idea of a tomato plant, and that when we water the tomato plant and we give it sunlight, then it grows, right? And it's the same with our worries. If we water them and we give them sunlight and we take good care of them and we pay lots of attention to them, then they grow. And so it's a really good visual way for kids to understand what's happening. And it gives lots of practical strategies, including some of the relaxation techniques we talked about today. And same idea for the Outsmarting Worry book. For older kids and teens, it also gives some really good suggestions and explanations for them to give them a better understanding. So that's all I have. And I wanted to leave a couple minutes if there's any other questions. But here's my information if anyone needs to reach out, if anybody has questions, or if you are needing to reach out for help. We do have therapists that work with kids, work with teens, adults, couples, the whole gamut. We also do, like I mentioned, we have groups from time to time that work on social skills and coping skills. We practice a lot of these skills in our groups, and we do the same we have teen boy and teen girl groups as well. And then for those of you with kids with ADHD, we also offer executive functioning skills groups for kids called the Masterminds group. And I think we'll be doing another one of those this summer. So if anyone's interested in any of that, just let us know, give us a call or email me. And Allison, were there any other questions?
Yes, so we do have another question, and thank you. This was so encouraging and such great information, like practical, like I can do this at home. This was really, really good. So I'm going to summarize, but basically we have a person who indicated that their child is on the autism spectrum, ADHD, and anxiety, and incessant talking, like they might implode if they don't say what they have to say, even if it's the inappropriate time. But then they also feel not heard. But they're, I know that I've heard you talk about this before. But the parent would like to know, do you have any tips for that, or is there a particular type of therapy that would be helpful for what I described?
Yeah, I mean, that really it's a social skill, right? Being able to understand when to stop, when you've gone too far, when the other person is giving you cues that they're no longer listening or they're ready to move on to another subject. So that's a social skill that involves a couple of social skills. And so it's something that with our kids who are on the autism spectrum, they really need to learn these kinds of skills in a very matter-of-fact, structured, kind of an academic way. We have to teach those skills like we're teaching math in school. And then we have to practice it and we have to role play with them. And so that's something that I would encourage you, if you're not already doing, to do some of that at home, but maybe also seek out a therapist who works with kids on the autism spectrum who can specifically focus on those social skills. And that's something that these types of social skills groups can be helpful with as well, because it does give kids a chance to kind of practice in a setting where there's more than one child, and they can practice taking turns in the conversation. They can practice not interrupting. They can practice talking for a limited amount of time and then stopping and letting the other person talk. But we have to teach them in this very structured way. And I know this does tie into anxiety as well, because that does contribute to anxiety for those kids and can lead to those explosions. And so I think the more structured you make it with your rules and with your teaching, I think that can actually help prevent those anxiety outbursts as well. Because if you're teaching the social skills in a way that makes sense to them, and it's in that very structured, matter-of-fact way, and you're practicing it, then they're more likely to kind of follow those social norms, and then less likely to get frustrated, less likely to feel anxious and ready to explode and feel like they're not being heard. The other thing we do sometimes, because this does happen a lot with our kids with ADHD, who just feel like they need to talk and talk and talk and don't like to be interrupted, but tend to interrupt others. And so one thing that we can do with them as well is try to redirect some of that. So we can tell them that, I really want to hear everything you have to say. Why don't you write the rest of that down for me? And then later we can talk about it. You can share with me what you wrote down. I've had kids who had to do that in class, keep a journal or a notebook, and their teacher would allow them to keep that at their desk so that they could say some of what they wanted to say. And then the teacher would say, okay, excellent, Matthew. Now go ahead and write down the rest of what you want to say in your notebook. And then you can share that with us as soon as we get a chance, or right after this lesson, I'll come over and you can share that with me. So we do still kind of have to make that time for them when we do that, but it's a way to redirect it. So hopefully that gives a couple ideas.
So one person said, and I think that we do have a lot of families here that have the comorbid conditions going on. What type of therapist? Because a lot of our families are doing ABA. Are you talking about a licensed clinical social worker, a psychologist, an ABA specialist? I mean, what type of therapist are you speaking of?
So it's a good question. And kind of interestingly, all of those options would work if it's someone who specializes and is trained in working with kids on the autism spectrum. So ABA therapy, for those of you who are here who may not know, is applied behavior analysis, and it's a very structured type of therapy that is designed specifically for kids on the autism spectrum, but works for other behavioral issues as well. But it's very behavior focused and very structured, and it can be great for teaching some of those social skills. And there are ABA practices who work with kids at a range of ages. Some practices only work with younger kids, but some will work also with school-age kids and even teens. And so that's certainly an option. There's also lots of therapists in private practice that are either licensed professional counselors, licensed marriage and family therapists, licensed clinical social workers. There's lots of different licenses, and these are all licensed therapists. And if they specialize in working with kids and kids on the autism spectrum, then they will know some of these techniques in how to teach and practice social skills. And then another option also that I've seen have positive results is speech therapists. So there's a lot of speech therapists who work on what they call pragmatic speech, or pragmatic language, which is just the day-to-day use of social language, not just focusing on, how we speak, but focusing on those social interactions and how we use language socially. And so, speech therapists who have that experience and training would also be a good option, because they're going to directly work on those language skills. So I think all of those are options. For us at our practice, we have a range of therapists, and so they all have different areas of expertise. We do have a couple of different therapists who specialize in working with kids on the spectrum, as well as kids with ADHD. And so we do have some that are an option. And then I also can, if it's helpful, I can get a list of ABA centers and practices and share that with you, Allison. But there's several around town, and that is what they specialize in, working with kids on the autism spectrum. They do work on social skills. Some of them also offer social skills groups as well. So yeah, I think all of those are good
If you want
options.
to send us that list, Lindsay, then we'll
Mhm.
send that out in the email that we're sending out with the slides and the recording. And we're out of time for tonight. Thanks,
Sure.
guys, for your patience and hanging in a little bit, 5 minutes over. But Missouri City Family Counseling is awesome, as you can tell with Dr. Asawa. So if you guys need support or you need help, reach out. They are accepting new patients. And I should have mentioned at the beginning, in the email that you guys are going to get, you guys are going to also get an application and an invitation to join ADDA. It is not required. You do not have to join ADA to attend our webinars, but you will get that. The membership is super cheap for the year. And they have a national conference. They have groups all across the state for parents, for families, and so you can check that out. But we'll have that information in our email as well. So thanks again, everyone, for attending. As usual, Lindsay, you're awesome, and we appreciate the time that you've spent with us tonight. So thanks so much, everyone. Have a great evening. Take care.
Bye.